Hello, my name is Franz Altner, and in this video, I want to give a short summary of List Embedded's proceduralist account of group agency. Now, List Embedded in their 2011 book on group agency argued that we can only understand and predict the behavior of organized groups by adopting the intentional stance toward them. Intentional stance was a concept developed by Daniel Dennett in a theory of series of papers. The intentional stance consists of two parts. On the one hand, it consists of attributing mental states to systems, such as groups in our case, and in a second part, in assuming that these mental states satisfy standards of rationality. Now, List Embedded grouped these standards of rationality under these three categories. So, attitude to attitude standards of rationality, for example, specify that a rational agent can't have inconsistent intentions. Attitude to fact standards of rationality specify that beliefs that we attribute to group agents must aim at truth. Now, the novel contribution to the debate was to argue that use tools from the theory of social choice and argue that group attitudes are determined via aggregation functions that take as input manifested individual attitudes and judgments on propositions and output the relevant group attitudes. Now, aggregation functions sounds a bit abstract, but what they mean by it is, for example, simple majority voting, dictatorial systems, where the dictator determines the group's attitudes on certain propositions, but also collective deliberation can be modeled via aggregation functions, although that's much more complex than simple majority voting. Now, hierarchies, many groups have hierarchies, and these relate to aggregation functions in that they fix which individual attitudes are relevant for the aggregation functions in determining the group attitude. And these hierarchies also determine which set of members is to enact group decisions. Now, the big kind of insight that List Embedded had, and the argument they're most famous for, was to say that not every aggregation function ensures group rationality. So, for example, majority voting on logically interdependent propositions does not ensure consistent group attitudes. And this argument by them is known as the discursive dilemma. Now, a very simple aggregation function like the dictatorial system does ensure consistent group attitudes as long as the individual members, as long as the dictator has consistent consistent attitudes. Now, finally, oftentimes we find that groups don't quite, like individual agents, don't satisfy all standards of rationality that they're under. So, for example, a group might have inconsistent intentions. And now we can still maintain the rationality assumption, so the rationality assumption is still justified if the group is capable of reasoning. And this is at least what List Embedded argue. Now, List Embedded understand reasoning as rational processing, moving from attitudes to other attitudes, like moving from the set of attitudes that is P and if P then Q to, say, Q, via beliefs in meta-language propositions by the relevant members that impose checks on these processes. So, for example, this is a belief. So the beliefs in meta-language propositions take the form, for example, of from P and P then Q follows Q, and follows is a meta-language aspect in these propositions. Now, if groups can have aggregation mechanisms with which they can form these meta-language propositions, then they count as reasoning, and reasoning groups can robustly satisfy the rationality assumptions.